The evening air outside the Vaynar estate hall was cool and calm, but inside the place buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, Joran Vaynar's retirement after 35 long years of loyalty to Stravik Tech. Joran stood near the entrance with his wife, Lena Frost, smiling politely as guests from every corner of the company walked up to shake his hand. His salt and pepper hair caught the soft light of the chandeliers, and for once, there was a softness in his usually serious face. Lena stayed close, her hand brushing against his arm every now and then, a quiet reminder that she was proud of him. "This feels strange," Joran murmured as he looked around the room filled with familiar faces. "All these people. I didn't think they'd care this much." Lena smiled softly. "They do care, Joran, even if they don't always show it. Tonight is for you." Joran gave her a nod, though a part of him still felt uneasy. He had worked in this company for decades, pouring his heart into projects, staying late into the night, saving teams when deadlines almost destroyed them. But he had never been one for attention or speeches. He just wanted a quiet night, maybe a few kind words, and to walk away with dignity. The music lowered, and the chatter slowly died down as someone tapped a glass. Joran turned and saw the Stravain, his longtime boss, standing at the front of the room near the microphone. The Los looked sharp in his dark suit, his thin smile giving away nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Los began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we gather to say goodbye to Joran Vaynar, a man who has been with this company since its very beginning." The crowd clapped politely, and Joran felt a tiny bit of relief. Maybe the Los would surprise him and say something nice after all. But then Thalos' tone changed. "And what a long journey it has been," he said, smirking slightly. "In fact, I'd say no one has perfected the art of doing the least amount of work for the most amount of pay quite like Joran has. Truly, a master of staying under the radar." The room let out an awkward laugh. A few people chuckled for real. Lena stiffened beside Joran, her smile vanishing. The Los went on, clearly enjoying himself. "We all know Joran as the man who somehow survived every round of layoffs by sheer luck. The man who took more sick days than anyone in the engineering department. The man who..." The Los, one of the guests muttered under their breath, but the Los kept going. "I think we should all raise a glass," he said mockingly, lifting his drink high. "To our company's most reliable furniture. Always there, always collecting dust, but never really doing much." Laughter erupted this time, louder, crueler. Joran stood frozen. His face flushed hot, but he didn't move. Inside, something twisted and snapped. This was supposed to be his night. His farewell. And the Los had just turned it into a public humiliation. Lena reached for his hand under the table, her grip firm. "Don't let him see it hurt you," she whispered. Joran's jaw tightened. He forced a small, cold smile at the Los, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing him break. But inside, every insult cut deep. He thought of the years he had worked overtime without pay, the nights he had missed family dinners to save projects that would have otherwise failed. And this was how they saw him? When the Los finally finished his speech, the applause was thin and scattered. Some guests avoided looking at Joran altogether. The room felt heavier now, like a storm cloud had rolled in. Lena leaned close. "Joran," she said softly, "you don't have to sit through this. We can leave." But Joran shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice calm but full of steel. "Not yet." He stood up and walked toward the bar, ignoring the looks from the crowd. He needed a moment to breathe, to think. Something inside him was changing. All those years of staying quiet, staying humble, swallowing his pride. Tonight he felt them burning away. In the distance, the Los laughed with a small group, clearly pleased with himself. The sound made Joran's hands tighten around his glass. The music started again, but the mood of the room had shifted. The Vaynar estate circle whispered among themselves, some glancing at Joran with sympathy, others with uncomfortable curiosity. Everyone was waiting to see what he would do next. And Joran knew, tonight would not end the way the Los expected. The party hall buzzed again, but it wasn't the same as before. The laughter from the Los Stravain's cruel words still echoed like a stain on the night. Joran Vaynar sat quietly at the side table with Lena Frost, his glass untouched in front of him. His wife tried to distract him with small talk, but she could feel the tension building in him, a storm he was holding inside. Across the room, the Los still smiled and laughed with a few guests, as if nothing had happened. He leaned close to one of them and said something that made them chuckle nervously. But no one dared to speak too loudly now. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone felt the shift in the air. The Vaynar estate circle whispered among themselves, heads tilted, eyes darting between Joran and the Los. Some felt pity for Joran, others were simply uncomfortable. And a few, the kind who loved gossip, secretly enjoyed the drama. But above all, the room was restless, waiting for something to happen. Then, suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall opened. The noise inside dropped instantly. Every head turned. It was Cashin Rulek, the new CEO of Stravik Tech. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp navy suit, he carried himself with a calm authority that made people step aside as he walked in. His presence was enough to silence even the boldest whispers. Joran lifted his head in surprise. He hadn't expected Cashin to come. The man was busy, running international branches, handling contracts that would shape the company's future. For him to walk into this room, at this exact moment, it was almost unreal. Thalos' smile faltered as he noticed the shift in the crowd. He straightened his jacket, forcing another smirk, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Cashin walked straight toward the front where the microphone still stood. He didn't rush. Every step he took echoed across the marble floor, making the room feel smaller, tighter, as though all the air was being drawn toward him. When he reached the microphone, he paused, scanning the faces before him. His gaze landed on Joran for just a moment, then on the Los. "What an interesting speech," Cashin said slowly, his voice deep and steady. "The Los, was it? Calling a man like Joran Vaynar a lazy deadweight? Bold words." The crowd murmured. The Los chuckled stiffly, trying to brush it off. "Just a bit of fun, Cashin. You know how these parties can be. Nothing serious." But Cashin didn't smile. His expression hardened, his eyes sharp. "Fun? Is that what you call it?" He looked around at the guests, his voice carrying power. "Because what I see is not fun. What I see is a man who gave this company 35 years of his life, mocked in front of his family, his colleagues, his friends." The room went still. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Cashin turned his gaze fully on the Los. "Do you even know what Joran has done for Stravik Tech? Do you remember the crash in 2012, when the company nearly went under? Do you know who designed the product line that pulled us back from the brink?" The Los blinked. He didn't answer. Cashin's voice rose, not with anger, but with undeniable force. "It was Joran. Without him, none of us would be standing here tonight. Without him, there would be no company for you to run, the Los. No job for you to sit so comfortably in. You owe him everything." Gasps filled the hall. The Vaynar estate circle exchanged shocked looks. Some nodded in agreement. Others stared at Joran with new respect, as though seeing him for the first time. Lena's eyes glistened with pride. She held Joran's hand tightly under the table, whispering, "Do you hear that? Finally, the truth." Joran didn't move. His face remained calm, but inside, his chest burned with emotion. After years of silence, years of staying humble while others took credit, someone was finally saying what he had always known. His work had mattered. The Los cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Yes, Joran did good work back then, but times change. We can't live in the past." Cashin turned toward him, his voice cutting like a blade. "Respect does not expire with time, the Los. Loyalty and dedication deserve recognition until the very last day." He stepped closer to the microphone, his eyes sweeping the crowd again. "And tonight, I will not let lies and cruelty stand as Joran's farewell. He deserves better than that. He deserves the truth." The applause came suddenly, not polite, but strong, growing louder as more people joined in. Guests stood, clapping, some even cheering. The hall that had felt so heavy moments ago now shook with energy. Thalos' face turned pale. His smirk was gone. He looked around as though the walls themselves were closing in. Joran rose slowly from his chair. His steps were steady as he moved toward the front, the applause still thundering around him. He stopped beside Cashin, who nodded at him with quiet respect, then stepped aside to let Joran speak. Joran's hand touched the microphone. The noise began to settle, though whispers still carried through the room. All eyes were on him now. He looked at Lena, then at the guests, then finally at the Los, who stood stiff and speechless. "Thank you, Cashin," Joran said, his voice calm but firm. "And thank you to all of you here. But before I leave this company, I have one last announcement to make." The applause stilled completely. The air thickened again. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath. And Joran knew. The moment he had been waiting for all night had finally arrived. The hall grew silent. The kind of silence where even the sound of a glass being set down could echo like thunder. Every pair of eyes in the Vaynar estate circle was fixed on Joran Vaynar. He stood at the microphone, his tall frame steady, his voice low but commanding. After decades of being quiet, tonight his words carried weight heavier than stone. Lena Frost sat at the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tight, her heart racing. She had seen her husband endure humiliation with dignity, but she had also seen something change in his eyes tonight. This was no longer just about a retirement speech. This was about truth, about justice, about closure. Joran cleared his throat. "All of you know I've worked here for 35 years, he began. His eyes swept the room, moving over familiar faces, some guilty, some curious, some simply waiting. You know I've been part of projects that shaped this company. You know I've stood by through good years and bad. But what most of you don't know is that I haven't been sitting quietly these past few months. I've been preparing." The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through the hall. The Lostravain stiffened, his jaw clenching. He leaned forward slightly, as if ready to interrupt, but Cashin Rulek stood just behind Joran, his arms crossed, his gaze locked on the Los like a silent warning not to interfere. Joran continued. "2 months ago, I made a decision. I took my savings, my stock bonuses, and everything I had worked for, and I invested it. Not in vacations, not in houses, not in a quiet life. I invested in the future." He paused, letting the words settle. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then Joran dropped the truth. "I became a major shareholder of Viridian Robotics. And as of last week, the deal was signed. Next quarter, Viridian Robotics will officially acquire Stravik robotics division." The silence cracked open with a gasp. Several guests covered their mouths, others whispered furiously, their voices sharp and quick. Someone at the back exclaimed, "That's impossible," while another muttered, "No wonder he's been so calm tonight." Elena's eyes widened in shock, but then softened with pride. Her husband, the man mocked as lazy Deadweight, had just revealed himself as one of the most powerful men in the room. Thalos' face drained of color. His smirk was gone, replaced by disbelief. He staggered a step forward, pointing a trembling finger at Joran. You can't do this. You're retired. You're finished. You don't have the right." Joran cut him off sharply, his voice like steel. "I have every right. Because while you were busy insulting me, I was building something bigger than your narrow little world. You thought you could humiliate me tonight? No, the Los. Tonight is the night you answer to me." The room erupted again, some guests clapping, others gasping, a few whispering excitedly as the news spread like wildfire through the Vaynar estate circle. Cashin allowed himself the faintest of smiles, nodding as though everything was falling into place exactly as he had expected. The Los tried again, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "This is a joke. No one here believes you." But Joran was ready. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black folder. He opened it and lifted a document high for all to see. The Viridian Robotics seal gleamed under the chandelier light. "This," Joran said firmly, "is the signed agreement. It's not just real, it's already done." A stunned hush fell over the room. It was undeniable now. There was no escape for the Los. One of the younger employees whispered loudly, "So, does this mean Mr. Vaynar will technically be in charge of us again?" The realization spread quickly, murmurs rising like a wave. The Los looked around frantically, his own people avoiding his eyes, some even stepping back from him as though he carried a sickness. Joran turned toward the crowd, his expression calm but unyielding. "I didn't plan to say this tonight. I wanted to walk away quietly. But when a man tries to strip you of your dignity, sometimes the only answer is to show him the truth. And the truth is, I will no longer work under the Lostravain. From now on, the Los will work under me." The hall exploded into noise, gasps, laughter, shocked voices, even applause. The humiliation that the Los had tried to force on Joran had now twisted back onto him with 10 times the weight. Lena stood now, tears in her eyes, clapping proudly. Cashin joined her, his applause measured but powerful, like a stamp of approval from the highest authority in the room. The Los could barely stand. His face was pale, his lips trembling, his hands shaking at his sides. For the first time in years, the man who always walked with arrogance looked small. Joran turned back to the microphone one last time. His voice was softer now, but it carried the full force of his triumph. "I came here tonight expecting a quiet farewell. Instead, I was insulted. But maybe that was the push I needed. Maybe I needed to be reminded that some people will never see your worth, until you show them exactly how powerful you really are." And with that, Joran stepped away from the microphone, his head held high, leaving the room buzzing with shock and whispers. The party was no longer about his retirement. It was about his victory. And the Lostravain knew his world had just collapsed in front of everyone. The banquet hall of the Vaynar estate felt nothing like it had at the start of the evening. What had begun as a party filled with polite laughter and clinking glasses had turned into something unforgettable. Every person in the room, every member of the Vaynar estate circle, now buzzed with energy, their voices low but urgent as they processed what they had just heard. Joran Vaynar stood tall, no longer the quiet man overlooked for years. His announcement had ripped through the hall like a storm. He had revealed himself not as a tired retiree, not as the lazy deadweight the Lostravain mocked him to be, but as a man who now held the future of the company in his hands. Lena Frost moved to his side, her hand slipping into his. Her grip was warm, steady, and proud. Tears shone in her eyes, but her smile was unshakable. She whispered so only he could hear, "You did it, Joran. You finally showed them." Joran gave a small nod, but his gaze remained fixed on the man across the room, the Lostravain. The Los stood frozen, his body stiff, his face pale. The arrogance that had fueled him for years seemed to have melted away. He looked like a man cornered, exposed, and broken. For the first time, he wasn't the one laughing. He wasn't the one in control. The whispers around the room grew louder. "Did you hear? Viridian is taking over the robotics division. He'll be Thalos Superior now. I can't believe it. All those years, and no one knew." Cashin Rulek, the new CEO, stepped forward. His deep voice cut through the noise. "Enough whispering," he said calmly. The room stilled at once. He turned toward Joran, his expression sharp but respectful. "Tonight, you reminded all of us what true loyalty and strength look like. On behalf of this company, I thank you, Joran Vaynar." The applause that followed was thunderous. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite, it was real. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting his name. The very same people who had laughed moments earlier now stood united in admiration. Joran raised his hand slightly, signaling for silence. The crowd obeyed. His voice was steady, carrying over the hall. Respect is not something that should be taken for granted. It should be earned, and it should be returned. Tonight was never meant to be about power or revenge. But when someone tries to take away your dignity, you must decide whether to bow your head or stand tall. His words struck deep. People nodded, some with regret in their eyes, remembering how they had laughed when the Los mocked him. The Los finally moved. His voice cracked as he spoke. This doesn't change anything. You're retired. You're gone. You can't control." But his words collapsed under Cashin's sharp gaze. Cashin's voice was firm, final. "You're wrong, the Los. Everything has changed. From this moment forward, Joran's influence will reach farther than yours ever has. And if I were you, I'd start learning how to show respect to the man who just saved your career from ruin." The humiliation was complete. The man who had once walked through the halls with power and pride now looked like a shadow of himself. His shoulders slumped. He lowered his eyes. And for the first time, silence followed him instead of laughter. Lena squeezed Joran's hand tighter. "It's over," she whispered. But Joran shook his head softly. "No, Lena. It's just beginning." He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising once more. "Tonight, I leave this company not as a forgotten employee, but as someone who built it with his hands, his time, his life. And I promise you this, I will continue building. For those who believe in loyalty, for those who value truth, there will always be a place beside me." The cheers that followed were deafening. People shouted his name, clapped until their hands hurt. The Vaynar estate circle had shifted completely. What started as a mockery had transformed into a night they would tell stories about for years. Cashin stepped forward and extended his hand. Joran looked at him for a moment, then shook it firmly. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a passing of power, a silent agreement that the future would be different. Lena stood tall beside her husband, her eyes filled with pride. She had watched him endure decades of silence, of thankless nights, of cruel remarks. Tonight, she saw him rise higher than any insult could reach. Joran glanced once more at the Los. Their eyes met. Joran didn't need to say a word. His calm expression was enough. The Los lowered his gaze, unable to meet it. And with that, Joran turned, guiding Lena toward the doors. As he walked through the hall, the applause followed him, echoing off the walls like thunder. He had come expecting a quiet farewell. Instead, he left as the man who turned humiliation into triumph, as the man who proved that dignity cannot be stolen, it can only be reclaimed. Outside, the night air was cool, fresh, alive with possibility. Lena looked at him and said softly, "You ended it perfectly." Joran smiled, the weight of 35 years finally lifting from his shoulders. "No," he said quietly, his eyes shining with something new. "I began something tonight." And together, hand in hand, they walked away from the Vaynar estate, leaving behind whispers, gasps, and the memory of a night where the tables turned forever.